All right, good morning. It's my fifth lecture in 5 days, so we'll see how it works and if I have some energy and spirituality left to keep your attention going. First test my eyes, see if I can see the site displays. All right, the title is more provocative than the presentation, but that's the first way of keeping the attention of the public, they say, and launch a very provocative title to call the combination between urban design and social innovation the culprit of carrying neoliberalism is quite daring, I would say, but I hope that towards the end of my presentation you will understand that indeed there is such a risk, that design methods, design approaches, different types of bottom-up approaches are just used as a kind of a substitute for serious policy making and for serious politics. One could even situate this presentation within the whole, thank you very much, within the whole debate of the post-politics and the end of politics in a way and the need to reinvent politics. And I believe that design can play a role in the reinvention and the re-establishment of politics, on condition that connections of different types are made between bottom-up strategies, which we will discuss in a minute, on the one hand, and socio-political movements, movement used here in a very broad meaning of the term, on the other hand. I guess this is the abstract you all saw, is that correct? Or, well, maybe you saw it, you didn't read it. I didn't read the program, so we are even. So I will skip this. It's about the same message as I just explained, explaining the title. In no way am I going to polarize between Manzini on the one hand and the Spindler's approach that we have been using in the planning and development team in Leuven, but I will try to show how complementarity and integration between both approaches can help us to make that bridge with the socio-political. First of all, I will risk my life by giving my own definition of what urban design is, and then if I'm still alive, I will continue with the next item. So, what is social innovation? Evolutions in the meaning of social innovation and the socio-institutional, socio-political context. Various contemporary meanings of social innovation. I will choose a few just to get some animo in the debate, and then moving on to the relationship between social innovation and design. How design has taken on board social innovation, but we can equally say, as Manzini would say, that social innovation has taken on board design. So there is the interaction between the which leads me to the last question, collaborative design and social innovation or not? Or rather, the culprit of neoliberalism, urban policy. What is in red there was a formulation on which I was not sure yet, but I had no time to discuss with Michael if there would be a better English word, but we can decide that. So the red has basically no meaning in this presentation. So what is urban design? In my view, it's designing parts of urban space with often a particular focus on a particular place, a subspace, and here we have the ambiguous meaning of space. I mean, in spatial development approaches, spatial planning approaches, space usually has the meaning of broader space and connections between different places and so on. But here, of course, when we talk about public space, we also talk about a particular place. So there is a place-space interaction in a particular location. It's designing particular spatial configurations, it's designing housing complexes, sorry, that was not a Freudian lapsus, I can guarantee you. And it is today also designing more comprehensive landscapes, there is regional design approaches and so on, which are then used in scenario analysis. You're supposed to know all these better than I do, but since I attend all these workshops and I'm involved in studios once in a while, I know a little bit what I'm talking about. Manzini says that the design is a kind of an interactive process between, on the one hand, solution seeking, and on the other hand, giving meaning. I can live with that as long as you do not isolate these dialectics from the broader socio-political questions that you have to ask when, for example, addressing the issue of public space. Space of the public, and what does the public mean? The state is not off the hook, as one of my PhD students kept saying a few days ago, Emmanuel Midene. The state is not off the hook in whatever social innovation or transformation process we are involved with. When we look at urban design, we have to make a distinction between different types of agencies. Manzini would make a distinction between expert agencies and more voluntary, bottom-up, spontaneous stakeholder issues, and so on. Institutional settings can be networks, which we have built up interactively, gradually by working with stakeholders, but institutional settings can also be a policy environment that promotes urban design as an interactive process. Urban design has evolved from a modernist to a postmodernist style, fashion or approach, from an expert to diffuse design. This is a very eclectic sentence, of course. Some people would say that we have never reached the age of post-modernity, that in fact what has happened is a kind of corrigendum to modernity, in which the bottom-up has found a place in existing state structures and so on. It's a different debate. I won't go into this because, again, and this is the last time I refer to Michael, he said I had prepared a lecture for an hour and a half, so we cut it short. And that's why I skip on this very interesting debate. Urban design is frequently staged as a pathway to social innovation, as much as it has become participatory through social innovation. Manzini, for example, explains how the quality of design can improve quite a bit if socially innovative practices of communication, cooperation, agenda setting, and so on are brought on board. But to which type of social innovation does it lead? I mean, if we bring social innovation on board, and if we give it a prominent role in design experiences and projects, then to which type of social innovation do these design experiences lead? First of all, what is social innovation? Some of you know that I have been working on social innovation for the last 25 years. I mean, I'm widely internationally cited on the topic. I have about one keynote address a month to talk all over the world about social innovation and community development. Through the years of research, which started in 1989, we have come to a definition that is more or less generic, and that we think should be a kind of triple criterion to check if we are really talking about social innovation when we look at a community initiative, when we look at a design experiment, when we look at a new political initiative, and so on. So the definition of social innovation, which can be used as a triple criterion to check if what we are looking at or are engaged with is real social innovation based on three pillars. First of all, the collective satisfaction of unsatisfied public needs. Innovation in social relations, referring to better communication, solidarity, associativity, reciprocity, building, to use that term I hate, but which is used all over, building better social capital and the different features in it, and then social political empowerment. When one of these is missing, I do not speak about social innovation. For example, you can have a particularly, we'll say, 1984 situation, Huxley 1984 situation, where the satisfaction of unsatisfied human needs in the material, physical sphere is guaranteed, but where people are isolated from each other and do not have the kind of quality of social interaction. You can have these two combined, but this can lead to the creation of enclaves, of very isolated communities, where people work together to make sure that they have what they need and so on, but with no further consequences for the broader society. So there is no joining up of community initiatives into social political empowerment dynamics that would make it possible to involve many more communities in this kind of social emancipation ambition. This definition starts from, you can read this, I can drink a little bit in the meantime. This is important. I mean, very often people tell me, Moulaert, you are just dreaming, you're utopian. No, this definition is based on what we witnessed, starting in the 80s, going into the 90s, what we witnessed in many community development initiatives in urban areas, in the Poverty Tree program, in the urban program, and so on. So it's observing what is going on, and it's observing what the criteria are for successful social innovation activities. Then, of course, you see how some of the experiences do not meet each of these three, or do not meet the criterion that the three dimensions should be integrated with each other. But this then also helps to understand why these initiatives are not long-lasting, are not resilient, to use another word I hate. You can make a list of all the words I hate and then ask me at the end why I hate them. But, so it's a grounded theory definition. It's based on participatory observation in urban neighborhoods and other local places. Participatory observation starting in the late 1980s till now, yet using the analytical categories offered to us by social science. So we have this long legacy of social science analysis in social work, in social relations, in urban and regional sociology, and so many other places, which offer us concepts that help us to analyze what's going on in communities and how communities can evolve on a socially innovative development trajectory. Evolutions in the meaning of social innovation. I dropped the word concept because many times, or in important moments in history, the term social innovation was used maybe unconsciously or intuitively and so on. The term social innovation, and that gives me deep joy, is much older than the term technological innovation. It goes back to the 17th century, and it was at the heart of some philosophical debates between the French and the English. So, in a way, it was a bit of a prelude to the long disputes between the two nationalities, the two national identities, in a way, which, like till today, joke at each other and really profile each other in very primitive terms and so on. So in this debate, the primitive terms which you will recognize was that English called the French the revolutionaries, and the French called the English the two easygoing reformers who only would think in terms of social reform when poverty became too hard to, whatever, you understand what I mean. So the term has been used in these debates. You can look, there is a nice article by Godin. If you Google, you will find it. Godin, Social Innovation. It's a Canadian, it's published in the 2 languages. You will see how the term has been used and got several connotations, which I will summarize in a minute in the table I will show. I will also show another table which is looking at a recent period, starting in the 1970s, when the term social innovation came into use again and started playing a very prominent place in some of the socio-political debates, of which I will give some illustrations. The last bullet point here, the distinction or relation between social innovation, social change, and social transformation, they're rather essential in distinguishing modernist and postmodernist trends in applying social innovation analysis, policy concepts, but also in talking about a relationship between innovation, social innovation on the one hand, and design on the other. In general, social innovation is used for more micro initiatives, community initiatives, local networks, and so on, which does not mean that we should not look at the socio-political dimensions. That's a completely different thing. I mean, if you look at the history of revolution and evolution, if you look at the history of social change in terms of revolution and evolution, very often the socio-political dynamics came from very micro initiatives that then would start working together and would roll out and connect to each other and build important social movements. Social change then is maybe the most fuzzy term, the most unclear term that refers to both social innovation and social transformation. It would be the term that is used by Christian emancipation movements, Christian civil society, and so on. Whereas social transformation would be connected much more to socialism or even to communism and so on. My understanding, and again I have no time to get into this, is that the 3 should be considered together because each of them has something to say. This microdynamics, social change, being aware of the evolutionary character of changes in humanity, and this one being aware that very often changes in humanity have gone through radical changes, revolutionary upturns or overturns, and so on. So, with what I said before, you can more or less fill in, I would say, or understand why I constructed this table. So for the Brits, I haven't said this, social innovation in the 17th, 18th century was a revolutionary term, something to be avoided. It's a hole in a way in Polanyi's book on the Great Transformation, the only hole where he could have enriched the book by bringing in also the debate on the meanings of social innovation. Anyway, if you haven't read that book, go home and do it now. Here, 2 stages in modernity refers to one of the initial remarks I made, saying that maybe we never came to postmodernity. Maybe we should consider postmodernity as modernity which has become more bottom-linked, which has given much more room to bottom-up initiatives, to decentralized initiatives, and so on. And postmodernity is probably the epoch in which we are looking or moving towards a new equilibrium between top-down, large, big-size organizations and structures of society on the one hand, and more bottom-up initiatives on the other hand. Many bottom-up initiatives fail because the state has been taken off the hook, for example. It's a very important, because funding mechanisms are completely broken down, and especially those funding mechanisms that would be useful to support bottom-up initiatives. It's in that area that the state is saving a lot of money, is making quite significant cuts. Question? No, you can't.
I don't think they're saving anything, they're just not spending anything.
What?
I don't think they're saving anything in that area because they were not spending anyway so much. Understand?
You just use the word saving.
Yeah.
But you can save in one sector and spend it elsewhere, and that's very often what is done.
Yeah, they're not saving in general.
No, but they're saving in the social sector, and they are still spending it on big projects, for example. So, yeah, but you see, it was a very relevant question. All right, again, this is picking, in a way, interesting. This there's no, how do you call this? No pointer, no? All right. I said that the discussion on social innovation and the role of social innovation in scientific analysis, in social movements, in political debates and struggle started off again in the 1970s, became much more explicit than ever before. Well, maybe I'm wrong on this, but at least if we base ourselves on the available sources. Taylor, one day they told me I had overlooked him. Now I have mentioned him in my table, but I haven't read him yet. But I'm retiring in 10 months, so that will happen soon. Chambon, David is really a very important book that brings together short texts and analyzes short texts by the big thinkers, the philosophers, intellectuals, leaders of the movement of the 60s. And in my opinion, the way they define les innovations sociales is still one of the most comprehensive, at the same time most structural, in fact including dimensions of what I defined before as micro-social innovation, social change, and social transformation. It's very much focused on the emancipation movement in education, in state democracy, in economic democracy. It's linked to the sexual liberation movement and so on. It's a very nice book that is still available in the Ramsch. You go on whatever site, you can buy it, I think, for a few bucks, euros. Yeah. Drucker, I put him here because he thought that social innovation in the previous century, or in the first stage of modernity, was especially a question of decentralization in organization in enterprises, slimming down of enterprises, and so on. So I mentioned it here not because it's so important for us to talk about design, but to point out to you that this concern about decentralization, bottom-up initiatives in the meaning of the business world was also very important. And that the term social innovation was also used in that context. And social innovation as a hinge term to refer to the need for organizational slimness. Moulaert et al. I explained the three criteria combined into one criterion to decide if social innovation is resilient or not. I mean, there is of course uncertainty, the third term I hate. There is of course uncertainty which we have to keep in mind, but there is a great consensus in in my networks that you have to make these three criteria guaranteed at the same time. Weber and Schumpeter are not part of the party today, so. Various contemporary meanings of social innovations. The most innocent yet also ignorant meaning is improving relations of communication and cooperation in co-production, and we find it applied in many social work, community development, and local design, place-linked design initiatives. It's a definition I took from somebody who's presenting at the Houston conference of the American Collegiate Schools of Planning meeting a few weeks ago. I forgot the name of the lady. Of course, I will add it when I. It was a kind of a funny presentation. She said in her presentation she was married to an engineer, and she talked about the relationship between actor network theory and social innovation, and how the two perspectives can be combined. And she said in her talk, nobody asked her, she said in her talk, I managed to explain what actor network theory means to my husband, who is an engineer, and he fully understood what it is. So I was in a teasing mood, so I stood up. Did you manage to explain social innovation to your husband, and did he accept your explanation? And she said yes, and that's when she gave that definition. So it's a very light way of defining social innovation. Improving relations of communication and cooperation. It's very vague, but it leaves quite a bit of space for discussion. I'm in 1/3 of my presentation, Michael. Is that manageable, or?
More or less.
More or less, okay. Now, I'm bringing up here 3 definitions that have played a very important role in the argument I have been building up about design. The first one is the Policy Advice Unit of the European Commission, which defines social innovation, or defined social innovation in 2010. Innovations that are social in both their ends and means. They are new product, services, and models that simultaneously meet social needs more effectively than alternatives, and create new social relations or collaborations. In other words, they are innovations that are not only good for society, but also enhance society's capacity to act. Chapter 8 of the Social Innovation Handbook completely deconstructs this definition, but I have no time to go into it. This is a political compromise, typical of the European Commission today. How did they come to this definition? There was very strong lobbying by the entrepreneurial world, by the business world, and by the Young Foundation. So there was a very strong pressure to really stress this micro view, and especially a view that would give room to promote social economy initiatives which would help to solve part of the problems of unemployment, but which could also help to restructure the welfare state. I mean, subcontracting many activities in the welfare state to social economy firms, in their view, makes the welfare states much cheaper. But of course they don't say this, they say brings the welfare state much closer to the users and their needs. So, in the meantime, we know that this does not work. I mean, part of it works, but a large part of it does not work, and so on. The second definition, which is very close to this one, as you can see, it's basically almost the same, is used by Manzini and is also inspired by the Young Foundation. So it's very close. Maybe I copy-pasted wrongly, but if you would see the real version, it's absolutely the same message. So the most important part of the definition is in the tail of the sentence. What is society? What is society? It's really a term without definition. And what does it mean to enhance society's capacity to act? And then there is a more substantial, in fact a more holistic and less substantive definition of social innovation as it was negotiated in one of the networks I have coordinated. I have coordinated 7 framework programs working on social innovation and spatial development from different perspectives. So social innovation is path-dependent and contextual. It refers to those changes in agendas, agencies and institutions that lead to a better inclusion of excluded groups and individuals into various spheres of society at various spatial scales. Social innovation is very strongly a matter of process innovation. This is changes in the dynamics of social relations, including power relations. Any of the projects we have been working with, in observation, in participation, in co-construction, it was so obvious that power relations, together with creativity, together with social cooperation and so on, made a difference. But if, for example, the local state went against what was going on in the bottom-up socially innovative initiative, then there was a big problem with only 2 options: stop or build up your own social resilience cells, as Manzini would say. So go for your own agenda, build your own networks, and then you will say, oh, aren't you contradicting yourself? Where is the socio-political then? But you see that socio-political is rebuilt because the communities will team up. They will form new social movements. They will try to speak to a higher level state institution. They will try to team up with state institutions in other regions and find a place in a wider area network, in a broader area network, in which there can still be a way to keep the state on the hook. Because without the state, in the long run, it hardly works. Either the state as a regulator, the state as a funder, the state as a partner, giving you access to public space, the state as an agent with whom you have to negotiate new regulations on the use of public space and so on. All right. So, how design has taken social innovation on board? As we know, there is a very wide diversity of experiences that would connect to the 3 criteria, or at least 2 of the 3 criteria, which would allow us to talk about good social innovation all over the world. And Manzini's approach is really to give a very wide overview how different combinations of materiality and sociality, in my own terms now, have led to very interesting socially innovative initiatives. Building collaborations to do new things that allow to satisfy needs in a particular place, in a particular space. So one of his slogans is social innovations towards a new civilization, and I can sympathize with them. I mean, our society is at all levels and in all its spheres in need of new socialities. I mean, we live in a rat race, we have no time to talk to each other. I come here to give my lecture now, I have to run off after lunch to prepare my next lecture, again on social innovation and so on. It's completely against the principles of building trustworthy, creative, social relationships. We'll have to do something about this. Keep that in the back of your mind. I already said that Manzini is very fond of the Mulligan definition. Our work has a footnote, as it had a footnote in the policy text of the European Commission, despite the fact that we negotiated quite a bit with them. So using the Melgen definition to examine the relationship between social innovation and design, both ways, I mean social innovation in design styles and design used to make social innovation more powerful. Also focusing, and that's very important, on bottom-up network and partnership design. The principles of good cooperation, the principles of good communication. How do you build agendas with different partners in a new project? Social innovation in design, to meet new needs, that's where he puts the stress in my understanding, to meet new needs, to work in new forms of collaboration, to involve new signifiers in making change tangible, co-design as social conversations, and he gives examples in the sphere of ecology, he gives examples in the sphere of the management of public space, he gives examples in the sphere of food provision, but also in the more classical fields of organizing public space and so on. Yeah, so virtually no sphere of bottom-up social innovation is absent from Manzini's account. This is, I could not make a copy of the figure that is more convincing in his book. I have the book here, I can circulate it if you like, but I think many of you should have seen it. So what he does is make this, look at this duality, not dualism, but duality between expert knowledge and bottom-up knowledge, which can be tacit or scientific and so on, so expert design. We call it diffuse design. I'm not so happy with this term, but it's what it means is design as fed to a very large extent by ideas and practices from grassroots organizations and culture activists. And then he makes this distinction, as I said before, between problem solving and sense making. And he said most good socially innovative design projects can be situated somewhere in this dynamics. I think I can be brief on this slide. I already said quite a bit. Design in and for social innovation. Design as placemaker. And place is also understood in terms of a place of people, where people are together, interact with each other. So good design of the features of a place in physical terms can contribute to a better quality of the social space in a way. Design as activism. Good designs are brought in by experts in already existent movements and give a new reset the momentum of that movement, but also design can be one of the instruments by which a good socio-political action is built up. Only he wouldn't call it a socio-political action. He would call it a collaborative project, he would call it a place-based project, and so on. So making a community garden tangible by a good design helps to convince people that they should go together for that community garden project, but also for the community-supported agriculture project as a whole, which includes building public space, improving social relations, positioning itself vis-à-vis food security, and so on. Spindus then. Spindus is a complex project, but it has done quite a bit of work that has had some socio-political impact. It's a project that was funded by IWT, SBO, the former research and development agency of the Flemish government in transition, about to be split up in an industrial part and a more fundamental part, the last part being integrated in FVO and so on. And if I am in a pessimist mood, meaning the end of social science funding, as we have already had the end of social science funding in the European Commission since the start of Horizon 2020, where you see that engineering teams are now considered as the specialists in community building and social innovation. Again, a different story. So the Spindus approach is about the collective analysis, evaluation and remaking of spatial quality. We looked at projects all over Flanders. There was Luchtbal in Antwerp, for example. There was Schorvoort in Turnhout. There was the Food for Thought project in the periphery of Roeselare and so on. Different with Manzini, we start from what I call, and it's also in the proposal of traders, a meta-framework. A meta-framework which brings together the different aspects of what is space. I mean, what should we look at if we want to understand space, but also what agents are involved, what actors are involved in the making of space. We have had a long history of producing space, of analyzing space, evaluating spatial impact and so on. So let's use this to make a kind of a framework in which we can work to analyze the quality of space and how the quality of space can be improved, collectively improved. So, collectively improved. So in a way, it's much more a modernist approach than Manzini's, because it uses a framework, a structure, to analyze the features of space and also to analyze the relationships between the makers and the actors of space, which is important. I'm just stressing this now because I want to show the differences with Manzini. It's important because it allows to look at the interactions with the social-political relationships. I mean, this design workshop we are doing, this planning workshop we are doing, this planning trajectory, because sometimes it were 18 to 20 months trajectories with it in Spindus. What is its social-political meaning? Does it change something to the urban policy of the municipality and so on? And in what way? That was a very big concern in the Spindus approach. Yeah. Very briefly, this is a very schematic approach of how we worked in Spindus. We did a lot of desk research, but also interviews with privileged witnesses from three fields, research by design, social innovation, institutional strategic planning. And we asked ourselves if bringing these disciplines together and making them talk much better to each other would help to create a more appropriate framework to address issues of spatial quality, improvement of spatial quality, setting up projects for more accessible public space, and so on and so on. So it's an evocation of the concerns that were there. I cannot say much more about it. I mean, there has been a special issue in the Journal of Urban Design about Spindus. There has been one in International Planning Studies. There is the Spindus book, the Handbook of Spatial Quality, which will come out in English in 6 to 8 weeks. Time for me to drink and for you to read. So. No surprise here, the meta-framework looks at the features of space and how they develop interactively, but also looks at the roles of the actors in space, the users of space, but also the planners and the designers in the Spindus project. Are they the friends of the mayor? Do they have privileged relationships with the local bankers and real estate developers? Or are they there in a sound and independent role, trying to help out the community to move forward towards an improved public space? And by having this pre-knowledge of how actors in the past and today interact with each other to have an impact on space through real estate development, through public space organization, we have a kind of an agenda of points to which we should give attention. Corruption, conflicting agendas, or, in a positive way, really the desire to make a good city, a livable city, a just city. This is another way, Michael, well, I said I wouldn't cite him anymore, but Michael said it's very difficult to pass this message of this duality, the two layers, the relationship between the makers of space on the one hand and the features of space on the other hand. So, still another way of reformulating the same concern. So it's a shared vision of the characteristics of space and its reproduction, a co-constructed ontology of space and its quality. We did that on the basis of the literature, but then we went with this provisional synthesis of our reading of space to the stakeholders, to the actors. So it was a first input. This meta framework was an open structure that could be changed. At the same time, it's also a working guide. A working guide not only to look at roles of actors and features of but also to decide on which methods to be used. A simple round table conversation, the use of expert knowledge. When you work in an area that is very sensitive to the influence and the presence of water, you cannot work without a good hydrologist, for example. And you need good studies about the state of the soil and the dynamics of what's going on in the water factory of your locality. So this is a schematic overview of the basic dimensions of the Spindus meta-analytical framework. It's also your yoga exercise for today. Maybe the second or third one, I don't know. So space is relational, I said that. Spatial justice is connected also to the ethical issue, which shows up in other characteristics, no time to explain that. Spatial justice plays a very important role in the debates, in any kind of serious design project. You need a discussion on what are the ethical foundations, for whom are you doing it, with whom are you doing it, what are the norms you are applying, and so on. But also, where do the different actors come from? Do they have interests that are absolutely conflictive with what they are doing here in what is supposed to be a project for the public interest, for example? Different types of agency and activity. This refers to the different types of actors and what they do. The role of power, structure and relations, multi-scalar perspective, and then collective learning, negotiation and action, which are the dynamics of how the space and the spatial qualities are built up, but also how the team works. Space is relational. Different type, here there is the different types of spaces, a la Rappaport, for example. The next slides give this detail, but we have no time to look at this. Just making clear to you that in the third characteristic, the uses of space are to be read according to different types of space identified in the literature, so social, cultural, physical, biological dimensions, and then also the sixth characteristic, sustainable development with all its analytical and socio-political shortcomings. So we go to the stakeholders in different roles. Again, I have no time to explain this. It can be part of the discussions. But we go to the stakeholders in different roles. We can go there as activists, or we can go there as commissioned specialists, experts. It's a different position, and that has important consequences. But in any case, when we go there, we have a checklist of features that should be looked at and agencies that should be thought about. I mean, these are the typical agencies that are relevant when you do a public space project and so on, which are available here, which are being brought on board in this particular case, and aren't any missing. What about silent voices? How do you bring in stakeholders that are usually not heard? And this is also a methodological question. Instead of round tables, instead of focus groups, instead of having public meetings, you have to go to the silent voices. Old people who have no mobility, you have to go to their houses, you have to interview them. Migrants who are hiding from the police, how do you talk to them? Very important question for Europe of today. Very important question. These are the two layers. I will skip this. Then, in the next slides, I give an idea of how the methods we selected developed in terms of the steps in the co-design and the co-planning, the co-production process in a way. But also how this development depended on the choices of the actor network. Is this legible? So this is one example. I think it could be focused a little bit, but one example showing over a period of 3 months for the Roeselare Thought for Food Spindus case, interaction between participation and design, how participation became design, how design reinforced participation, and so on. Each of these cases is a paper by itself, and you can read it in the Spindus handbook. So, to bring you back to the focus of the Spindus project, the pre-design of space, its actors and agencies, qualities, and how they change is done as according to the meta framework, the 7 characteristics, the 2 layers, and so on. I mean, this is like a first inventory of what is there in that place, the actors, the issues, and so on. A first meeting with the people concerned will lead to some priorities, saying, oh, we want security, we want good pedestrian access, we want playing grounds for our kids, we want less polluting cars next to the playgrounds, and so on. So we work with that, but at the same time we use the meta framework to say, you're forgetting this. Because if this major crossroads is not moved, and if this big road is not moved, even if it's at 5 kilometers, then you can never meet the low traffic criteria which are so dear to you, and so on, and which would have an impact on the quality of the air, the quality of the playgrounds, keep going. So the expert knowledge and the way it is summarized in the meta framework is always in the back of our minds and is always used as a tool to challenge stakeholders, but also to say, okay, maybe we should bring other stakeholders on board. Or some inhabitants saying, like in Turnhout, it was the case, we want to hear the water story of this area. Why do they have to build all these, this, how do you call them, backends to absorb excessive water?
Basins.
Yeah, there is a technical term, it doesn't matter. Why do we need this? Can't we just restore the old hydrology, reopen the small rivers and the Bacon? Yeah, anyway. Yeah.
Ditches.
So we started mapping the old hydrological system, and the municipality in the end decided to reopen some of them. And it was the people locally who pushed towards this, but also because we said a place, a locality has water, you know, and you know there has been some areas that have been flooded. How did it happen? Why this disequilibrium in the hydrological and land use system? Okay, I have to stay brief now. I understand this. Yeah. Spaces and the spatial qualities that are addressed evolve over time through the interaction between actors and based on the progress in the action research, expected to create more clarity on the issues at stake and the action to be taken. So we have worked in Spindus with municipalities, we have worked with committees of inhabitants, we have worked with different organizations who had deep concerns about spatial issues. The fourth bullet point, you know, pre-structured methods are used, but they evolve through the different steps in the process. The stakeholders have the right to decide on changing technologies, on changing methodologies. And the whole process is socio-politically embedded. But each of the cases followed a different socio-political trajectory, while at the same time bumping into general political debates and issues. Housing policy in Flanders was transversal to the whole camping case study with it. I mean, camping as a first housing, on which Barbara van Dijk and Els Vervloesem did a case study that has been followed up by several other projects commissioned by the province of Vlaams-Brabant. So it's a follow-up project to Spindus. Land use policy, meaning of public space, better connections between traffic planning and the organization of public space, and so on. So many policy issues came to the front, but also many failures of socio-political movements and political parties to think more structurally in terms of land use and spatial quality. You won't believe it. Conclusion. Summarizing the comparative features of both approaches. Well, both approaches are, I think, very much in tune on the role of collaborative issue, the need to build better social relations, communication, and so on. The difference is that Manzini's approach is much more bottom-up and unstructured by the tradition of spatial planning and design scientific literature in a way. And second, as I flagged up from the beginning, is the very low importance he is giving to social political dynamics that could emerge and that could be fed from his how would I say, design conversations and building up small projects. There is certainly a postmodernist caliber in both approaches in terms of bottom-up, decentralized initiatives. There is certainly potential socio-political risks in both approaches, but they are different. In the Manzini approach, there is the risk that what people are doing very enthusiastically and with good result in the short run and very locally will not be upscaled or outscaled and will not have a wider impact and could extinguish after a while. Whereas in the Spindus social innovation a la Moulaert approach, the risk is that despite the fact that there is a high level of social political realism, this could lead to social political conflicts on the one hand, or could not end up in the desired or the intended social political movements or policy changes that the action researchers together with the stakeholders would put forward or would defend. Still, potential for social political diversity as a major driver of social transformation is very important. And although Manzini doesn't mention it in what he is doing in his cases, there is a strong potential to experiment with new forms of governance, local governance, new forms of social political participation. So there is certainly a possibility to let the two approaches talk to each other. I mean, make Spindus more tangible in the Manzini way, and make his approach more tangible in the Spindus way, especially stressing the social political meaning of any approach. Manzini refers very strongly to capability theory. I think I have said this before in this room when I was here the other time. Capability theory is a pure neoliberal theory, and it must be deconstructed. And I refer to the article by Dean, which really explains very well that Sen, less newsbound application of Sen, but Sen certainly in his capability theory has missed the social-political dimension completely, and the necessity to build social-political movements completely. That's a different lecture, and you can read that when I can send you the article. All right, I think that's enough.